I had believed betrayal would come like a blade, quick, decisive, clean. I had never imagined it would come wearing my own family's face. When the charges were spoken, they sounded rehearsed. Treason, aiding the enemy pack, stealing what belonged to our bloodline. The words were arranged with the careful cruelty of someone who wanted me to feel guilty before I ever had the chance to understand. I tried to speak. My voice didn't even make it past my throat. My brother, my protector, the one who used to lift me onto his shoulders when I was small enough to believe the world was safe, watched me as if I were already dead. He didn't raise his hand to stop the guards. He didn't even look away. His eyes held something worse than anger, relief. My mother's gaze landed on me like a weight. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She only said softly, as though it were mercy, "Lyra, you've always been difficult. You think you can choose your fate. You can't." I realized then that they weren't accusing me of treason. They were punishing me for becoming. I had been born with a sign that no one mentioned aloud, a crescent scar at my collarbone, pale as bone, that warmed whenever I stood too close to wolves who carried ancient oaths. I didn't know what it meant. I only knew it made people watch me like I might break. The night before they arrested me, I had felt my mark flare, hotter than fever, when I passed through the Eastern Hall. A whisper had crawled beneath my skin, not words, but pressure, like a door inside me had noticed someone on the other side. I thought it was hunger. I thought it was fear. Now, in the stone corridor outside the family hall, hands dragged me forward while I tried to keep my footing. Chains kissed my wrists. Iron sank into my skin as if it were eager to claim me. The last thing I saw before the dungeon gate sealed was Marrow Sable, our sworn ally, standing at the edge of the torchlight. She didn't look at me like a condemned woman. She looked at me like a possession. Marrow was not my family by blood, but she had always been treated like bone-deep truth. When she smiled, people believed she was blessing them. When she spoke, my mother's posture straightened like she was receiving instructions from heaven, and that night, as the guards took me, Marrow's mouth curved with sympathy that never reached her eyes. "Don't worry," she told someone behind me, but her words slid into my ear anyway. "When he's done using her, the mark will finally stop burning." Using her? I didn't know who she meant, but I understood then that the dungeon wasn't a punishment, it was an appointment. When the iron gate finally clanged shut, darkness swallowed me with a sound like the world closing its fist. My wrists chafed, my lungs fought the stale damp. The dungeons under our kingdom were older than the current throne, older than my childhood stories. They were carved from stone that never learned to warm. In those stones, sound didn't echo. It drowned. A water drip measured my time. The air smelled of cold iron and old breath. I refused to collapse. I refused to let my mind become a room where they locked me again. I sat against the wall and counted my breaths like I could bargain with fate. 1, 2, 3, until the rhythm became a rope, not for rescue, for survival. Hours later, maybe a day, the dungeon stole time the way thieves stole coin. The bars opened. Light spilled in as if the outside world were an accusation. 2 guards stepped in with torches and the careful posture of men who feared making noise. They didn't look at me. They didn't speak. They only unlocked the cell and pulled me forward like I was a sack. When we reached the corridor beneath the throne, the air changed. It thickened with power, with the faint metallic tang that came when the world decided to shift. The stone seemed smoother here, and the torchlight didn't flicker the same way. A scent brushed my senses. Pine and smoke, something wild and controlled, like a storm that knew where it would land. Then I saw him, Cale Valdor. The Alpha King was spoken of in warnings. Monsters didn't have crowns, kings didn't have rumors, but Cale had both, fear woven through every tale. His throne wasn't in a bright hall like I'd imagined royalty should have. It was set in a cavern carved to resemble a sanctum. The ceiling vanished into darkness above, and the stone around the throne carried carvings, wolves, broken circles, a ring of thorns that looked like it had grown from bone. Kale stood before his seat, not sitting yet. Silver hair hung in a rough elegance, too wild for a man who ruled. His dark gold eyes pinned me without curiosity. Not hunting, claiming. He didn't speak when I was brought forward. He circled once, slowly, like he was inspecting a blade's edge. My stomach tightened. My hands wanted to tremble, but I forced them still. I had been taken for treason. I would not beg. "I'm not your prisoner," I said anyway, my voice scraping the inside of my throat. "I'm your reason." The guard stiffened. Kale paused mid-turn. He looked at my collarbone where the crescent scar sat hidden beneath the torn fabric. His gaze narrowed as if he could see heat radiating through cloth. Then his mouth bent, not into a smile, but into something colder. "You're not mine," he said. "Not yet." Not yet. My skin prickled. Kale gestured once, and the guards backed away. The chains around my wrists loosened, not removed. He didn't free me. He didn't need to. The dungeon around us felt like a fist already closed. Even if my wrists were unbound, the stone itself would hold me in place. "Why are you here, Lyra Varen?" Kale asked. He said my name like he had the right to it. I didn't flinch. "Because my family wanted me silenced." His gaze sharpened. "And you believe I should be your judge?" "I believe someone used your kingdom as a grave." His expression didn't change, but the air shifted. Power rippled across the chamber like a restrained animal stretching its limbs. Kale moved closer, close enough that I could see fine lines at the corners of his eyes, like he'd learned patience through violence. The crescent scar on my collarbone warmed instantly, reacting to him. Kale's nostrils flared. Not fear, recognition. His eyes dropped to my mark and lingered. Then he looked back up. "There it is," he murmured. I swallowed. "You know what it is?" "I know what it does." The fact that he didn't sound proud, only certain, made my throat tighten. My family's betrayal now had a shape. Marrow Sable had dragged me toward him. But for what? For punishment? For extraction? For something that required my body as a key? Kale's wall of silence held until the sound of footsteps approached. A third presence entered the chamber like smoke slipping beneath a door. Marrow Sable. She wore dark finery that seemed too elegant for stone. When her eyes met Kale's, her posture straightened just a fraction, respect masked as entitlement. "My alpha," she purred, then turned to me as if she were selecting fruit. "You're awake sooner than expected. How brave." Brave. She used the word like it was meant to bruise. I met her gaze. "Did you do this?" Marrow's smile sharpened. "Family does what it must." "No," I said, my voice firming with anger. "Family doesn't sell its own blood to a dungeon." Kale's dark gold eyes flickered toward Marrow, and the air cooled. Marrow didn't seem offended. She seemed satisfied. "I didn't sell her," she corrected. "I delivered her. There's a difference. Treason is only true when it's written correctly." My heartbeat stumbled. Written correctly. So she wasn't just accusing. She was manufacturing reality. Kale lifted a hand, not touching either of us, but commanding the space itself. The torches dimmed. The carved wolves above the throne seemed to shift, as if their eyes had caught fire. "She will stay," Kale said to Marrow. Marrow's smile thinned. "My king, she's unstable. If her mark flares too often, it will open," Kale finished. "I know." He turned back to me. Lyra Varen, condemned by her family, handled by a king she didn't understand. I had been raised with rules, but the rules in that kingdom had never included me, so I chose my own terms. "If you're keeping me alive," I said, "it isn't kindness, it's leverage." Kale's gaze held. For a moment, the intimidation in him softened into something almost exhausted. Then he stepped closer again, and the power between us tightened like a drawn bow. "Leverage," he repeated. Yes. The honesty in his voice made my anger catch in my chest. And fear, he added. Also yes. I didn't know if he meant fear of me or fear of what I carried. I'm not afraid, I lied. My scar flared hotter, betraying my body's honesty. Kale's jaw flexed. You are, he said, but you don't know how to be what you truly are. A shiver crawled up my spine. What am I? Kale stared at me like the question was a lock and his answer was the key. You're the proof that old oaths still breathe. Old oaths. I looked at the stone around us. Carvings, rings, thorns. In my family's archives, before they decided my name was treason, I had seen references to a vow made before the first king, a vow that had been broken and then hidden. But I had never found the full story. Someone had removed pages. Someone had sealed knowledge behind rules and fear. Marrow approached again, slow and deliberate. She doesn't need prophecy, she said. She needs control. And she needs to accept her role. The Alpha King cannot afford distractions. Distractions. It was a warning wrapped in silk. Kale's eyes snapped to her. You've been telling yourself stories, Sable. Marrow's expression twitched, just once, enough to show she wasn't as untouchable as she wanted me to believe. Kale stepped back from the confrontation, turning his body toward me like a door closing in between us. I'm not killing you, he said, voice low. Not because I'm merciful, because there's something in you I need to understand. Need. The word made my ribs feel too small. Kale lifted his hand again, and the chains around my wrists loosened further until they no longer cut. He still didn't release me completely, but he changed the terms. Not a cage, a tether. Come, he commanded the guards. I want her under protection, not guard. Marrow's eyes narrowed. Protection from what? Kale didn't answer her directly. His gaze stayed on me. From what you're trying to awaken. The truth landed like a punch. Marrow had delivered me for a reason, but Kale was claiming he could control it, or he could stop it. I didn't trust either of them, but I trusted myself enough to stay alert. They brought me through a corridor that eventually opened into a stairwell, descending deeper than the dungeon. The air smelled different here, warmer, touched by something like herbs and old candles. The stone walls were wet, but not with prison drip water. It felt like condensation off a natural chamber. The deeper we went, the less the dungeon sounded like drowning. We arrived in a space carved larger than a chapel. Underground, yes, but not empty. There were braziers lined along the walls, their flames steady despite the damp. There were lanterns with rune-etched glass. There were beds carved from stone and covered in thick fur. A sanctuary. Unexpected. Unexpected meant dangerous, too. Kale didn't lead me inside immediately. He stopped at the edge, letting the light wash over me. I had expected you to beg, he said. I lifted my chin. I had expected you to let me rot. His eyes flickered, and something in his expression softened like a door unlatched 1 inch. You're still alive, he said. That should be your first lesson. My chest tightened. My second lesson will be learning what you hide behind that crown. Kale's mouth tilted, the first hint of amusement. Careful, Lyra. The way he said my name in the sanctuary made it sound less like a sentence and more like a choice. A woman stepped forward from the shadows. Not Marrow, another figure, cloaked in gray and wrapped in silence. She moved with the quiet competence of someone who had seen both mercy and cruelty. Your Highness, she said, the healer is ready. Healer. My breath caught. Kale turned his head slightly, eyes on me as if he was measuring my readiness to accept help. You have injuries, he said, as if speaking it aloud made it true. I survived the chains, I answered. No one has touched the deeper wounds. Kale's gaze sharpened. I realized I was speaking too confidently for a woman who had been thrown into a cage. But the more I remembered my family's faces, the more my fear transformed into purpose. I didn't want to be saved like an object. I wanted to be restored like a person. The healer approached, and Kale stepped back, granting space. The healer's hands were careful as she examined my wrists and the bruises on my arms. "My bones will mend," I said, watching her. "But my mind needs answers." The healer's eyes flicked to Kale, then back to me. "Some answers come in time." Time. It always came with a knife. Kale returned to my side, standing close enough that his scent wrapped around me. Pine, smoke, something feral and controlled. "My walls aren't for you," he said quietly. "They're for everyone else." I looked up at him. "Then why are you letting me close to them?" His gaze held mine. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "Because I think you can open what should have stayed sealed." He spoke like he regretted that possibility. The healer lowered her hands and moved away. Kale gestured. 2 guards carried a basin of warm water and cloth. I should have hated how gentle everything felt. Instead, my body betrayed me with relief so sharp it nearly hurt. I washed myself with careful movements, refusing to fully yield to the comfort they offered. I didn't want to be lulled. While my skin dried, the scar at my collarbone warmed again, responding to Kale's presence. Kale's breath caught. He didn't pretend it didn't affect him. And that honesty, dangerous in its own way, made my anger shift into something else. Curiosity. Because I felt it too. The mark didn't only recognize him, it strained toward him like it had been made for his bloodline. I hated that. I hated that my body already knew something my mind refused to accept. Kale watched me dress in a simple tunic the healer offered. His eyes didn't roam beyond my face and throat. The restraint was deliberate. He wasn't trying to intimidate me into submission. He was trying not to give in. "You're going to test me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Kale's brow lifted. "Yes." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll see whether you fight," he said, "or whether you break." "Then consider this my answer," I replied. "I don't break." Kale's gaze sharpened. "Not yet." There it was again, his insistence that destiny would eventually choose for me. But I had already chosen once. I had chosen not to beg. I could choose again. "Where is the real prison?" I asked. "Not this sanctuary, not the warm stone. I mean the part of your dungeon you keep hidden." Kale's stare tightened. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Marrow brought me here," I said, "and because treason was written correctly. Someone needs me in a place where answers can be extracted." Kale's jaw flexed. "Your instincts are loud." I met his gaze without flinching. "My instincts kept me alive in a family that wanted me dead." Kale's eyes lowered briefly to my collarbone again. "Then your instinct will keep you alive from me." From me. It sounded like a threat even when said softly. But then he stepped back, and the distance between us increased. It wasn't avoidance, it was restraint. Kale turned toward the sanctuary door, letting the torchlight catch the planes of his face. "Come," he said. "You'll see what I hide." I followed. As we moved through the sanctuary corridor, I noticed small details that didn't belong in a prison. Wards carved into the stone, runes stitched into iron bars, and a faint shimmer in the air as if something protective sealed the space. This wasn't a dungeon built to harm. It was built to contain. Contain what? My mark burned hotter as we passed certain carvings near an archway. Kale's eyes noticed immediately. He tightened his grip, not on me but on his own control. He stopped at a narrow door half veiled by shadow. "This is where your family's accusations go when they're finished with them," Kale said. He didn't open the door yet. He leaned closer to my ear. "You think you want the truth," he murmured, but it's not gentle. I swallowed, but my hands curled into fists. Truth has never been gentle. That doesn't make it less real. Cale's gaze held mine again, and I realized he was trying to read me, trying to figure out whether my strength was stubbornness or something deeper. Then he opened the door. Cold air flowed out. Inside was not another cell. It was a chamber with a mechanism, chains and pulleys mounted to the stone, but the metal looked old and unused. In the center, there was a basin filled with dark water that didn't reflect light like it should. It swallowed the torch's glow. A mirror, maybe, or a pool that captured memories. The moment I saw it, the scar at my collarbone flared, and a sound, like distant wolves howling through walls, ripped through my mind. I stumbled forward, hand rising before I could stop it. "Lyra," Cale warned. I didn't feel like I was moving. It was like something inside me was reaching through the air. The dark water rippled without being touched. Images flashed, my childhood in fragments, then my family hall with its bright banners and my brother's laugh, then my mother's cold silence, then Marrow's hand sliding a paper beneath my brother's seal. Treason written correctly. Paper and ink. A lie built like a spell. My stomach twisted. In the final flash, Marrow's face appeared in close detail, not as my ally, but as a puppet master. She pressed her palm to a rune on the mechanism above the basin. The rune lit, and Cale's voice spoke in the memory, low and furious, though I couldn't tell if it was real or imagined. "Don't put her here." In that moment, I understood everything with a clarity that hurt. Marrow had brought me to Cale's dungeon before I was arrested. She had arranged the lie with the intention of making my guilt undeniable. Cale had tried to stop it. Maybe he hadn't succeeded. Or maybe he had delayed it, so the truth would surface only when my mark was ready. I jerked back from the basin, breath coming too fast. Tears threatened, but I refused them. Crying felt like surrender. Cale stepped closer, and his hand hovered near my shoulder without touching. "I didn't want you to see that yet," he said. My throat burned. "Why not?" "Because seeing makes it personal," he answered, "and you're already at war with everyone." I let out a shaky laugh that tasted like steel. War is the only language they taught me. Cale's eyes darkened. "Then I'll teach you another." I stared at him. "With what? Comfort?" "Lies?" His jaw tightened. "With protection." I held my ground. Protection doesn't excuse betrayal. Cale looked down for a second, as if the accusation had struck deeper than he expected. "I didn't betray you," he said finally. I believed he meant it, but belief didn't erase what had already happened. Not yet. I turned away from the basin, my gaze landing on a rune carved into the stone beside it. It resembled a crown, but underneath it was a mark like a crescent. My mark. My breath caught. Cale followed my gaze. "Old magic," he said. "The oath you carry isn't just a mark, it's a key." "A key for what?" Cale's voice lowered. "For the place beneath the place. For the truth beneath the lie." The air around us seemed to thicken. "Then open it," I demanded. Cale's eyes narrowed. "Not alone." Not alone. That word triggered something in me, something protective rising alongside my anger. I wasn't going to be shoved into destiny like cargo. "If you're asking me to trust you," I said, "you need to understand I won't trust you with my body until I trust you with the reasons behind your silence." Cale stared at me for a long moment, then he nodded once, slow. "Fair." The word was rare enough to feel like a gift. Cale turned toward the sanctuary again. He didn't force me to follow. He let me decide if I wanted to be pulled back into his world. But I did follow, because I could feel the dungeon shifting around us, like it was responding to the truth being spoken, and because my mark burned with urgency now. When we returned to the main sanctuary, Marrow wasn't there. Instead, I found her waiting in the corridor outside, as if she'd been listening through stone. Her eyes glittered. "So the king let you see," she said. Kale stepped between us instantly. "I told you she would not be harmed," he said. Marrow's expression sharpened. "Not harmed," she repeated, voice sweet. "Only awakened. You should know, when the mark opens, it doesn't ask permission." My scar warmed, reacting to her presence. Marrow's gaze flicked to it, pleased. "It remembers. It always remembers." I stepped closer despite Kale's protective positioning. I didn't want to hide behind his body like I was fragile. "Why did you lie?" I asked Marrow. Marrow's smile widened. "Because the old oath requires a sacrifice." My stomach clenched. "Sacrifice to who?" Marrow leaned in, her voice a whisper with fangs behind it. "To the thing beneath the kings, to the hunger that keeps the throne breathing." Kale's aura shifted. He wasn't just angry now, he was alarmed. "You won't take her," he said. Marrow's eyes widened just a fraction, then she recovered with practiced calm. "You already chose her fate when you let her live." Kale's silence was heavy. In that quiet, I realized Kale had protected me before because he believed it was necessary. But protection wasn't the same as freedom. I wanted more than safety. I wanted choice. So I did what my family never let me do. I asked for power. I lifted my collar slightly, exposing more of my scar than I should have in front of enemies. The crescent glowed faintly, responding to the tension. Kale's eyes locked onto the mark. Marrow's smile faltered. "What are you?" Marrow asked, voice losing its practiced charm. "I'm not your key," I said, "and I'm not your sacrifice. If there's an oath in me, then it belongs to me too." Kale's voice was low. "Lyra." "No," I cut in. "I will decide when the truth opens." I felt something inside my ribs shift, as if an old latch snapped. Warmth flooded my veins. The dungeon's runes flared along the stone, reacting to my mark like it was the missing heartbeat. The air around me hummed. Marrow stumbled back, startled. "You can't. She can't." I didn't understand the magic, but I felt its logic. Hidden powers didn't appear because someone wished for them. They appeared because the body recognized the right moment, and the moment was now. The sanctuary lights flickered, the torches guttered. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd overreached. Then the glow settled. My breathing slowed. My fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became a tool. I looked up at Kale. His walls were still there, but something in him had changed. He wasn't just watching my power now, he was watching me. Marrow glared at me with hatred that looked almost personal. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I met her gaze. "You already made sure I would." Kale stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made the stone itself listen. "Enough," he said. Marrow's eyes flickered to him, and I saw fear, real fear, beneath her arrogance. Kale grabbed a small silver talisman from his belt and pressed it into my palm. "Keep it with you," he said. "It will steady the oath." My fingers closed around it. The talisman warmed immediately, fitting my skin like it had been waiting. Kale's gaze softened, barely noticeable. "You won't be alone in this anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to reject them. I wanted to demand more certainty, but my chest filled with something that didn't feel like surrender. It felt like possibility. We moved together into the depths where the mechanism opened earlier. The basin chamber lay ahead, still marked by dark water and the lingering echo of memory. Kale walked slightly behind me, not controlling my steps, but watching for danger. That was the difference. He wasn't using me as leverage, he was sharing risk. When we arrived, Kale stood beside the basin and lifted his hand toward the rune beneath the crown symbol. "The oath activates only when both keys accept each other," he said. "Keys," I repeated, "so I'm not the only one." Kale's gaze held mine. "My line bears a seal as well." He lifted his brow slightly, and I noticed something I hadn't earlier. Black iron marking across his forehead, faintly visible in torchlight. I hadn't realized how much the dungeon had already been pulling at him, too. My scar warmed again, aligning with his seal. The dungeon sensed it. The runes on the stone began to glow, but Kale didn't force it. He waited. He let me step forward. I looked at the basin's dark water. What happens if the truth opens too far? Kale's voice tightened. Then the hunger beneath the throne wakes. My stomach clenched. And Marrow wants that. Kale nodded once. She wants power without kingship's burden. She wants the throne to feed. My thoughts raced. Marrow wasn't simply a liar. She was a believer in something ancient and starving. I clenched the talisman Kale had given me. Then I looked at him and made my choice. "If you keep protecting me," I said, voice raw, "then I'm going to keep learning how to protect myself. Together, on my terms." Kale stared, and I saw something in him break open. Just a fraction. Not weakness. Release. "Lyra," he whispered. The way he said my name then wasn't command. It was reverence. I didn't understand why it struck me so deeply until the basin water rippled again, and the memory echoes returned. This time, the visions weren't just mine. They were Kale's, too. I saw him younger, training under the old throne's rules. I saw him kneel before a seal carved into stone. I saw Marrow Sable standing behind him, smiling like a judge. But in Kale's memory, Marrow wasn't smiling with affection. She was smiling with hunger. I watched Kale make a promise with his own hands bound by fate, swearing he would keep the oath sealed until he could find the right bearer. And I watched Marrow destroy his certainty. She had tried to force the wrong timing. She had tried to turn the oath into blood currency. Then I watched her set my family against me, not because my family was innocent, because my family was afraid. Afraid of losing influence, afraid of the throne's hunger waking, afraid of Kale's power because it could change who held the blade. My betrayal wasn't only personal, it was political, it was structural, and Marrow had used that structure like a weapon. Kale's walls came down a little more as the memories played out. His fists clenched, but he wasn't attacking. He was remembering what he refused to remember. Then the basin water surged. A symbol formed within the dark surface like a crack in the world. It shaped itself into a doorway made of shadow and silver runes. Kale's breath caught. "The door is open," he said. My mark burned. I could feel something calling from beyond, the hunger beneath the throne, the thing Marrow worshipped. Fear rose in me again, but I didn't run. I stepped closer. Kale reached out, but stopped short of touching me. He looked at me as if waiting for permission to share the worst of what might come. I took his hand. The moment our palms met, heat surged through my scar and into his seal. The doorway widened. Light didn't shine from it. Something colder breathed out. The sanctuary stones groaned. Marrow's voice echoed from somewhere behind the walls, distorted by magic. "Come, Lyra. Come accept your sacrifice. You were made for this." My throat tightened. I looked at Kale. His eyes were dark with something like grief. "This is why I kept you alive," he said, "so you could have a choice, not a fate." I swallowed hard. "Then give me my choice." Kale nodded once. He lifted our joined hands toward the doorway, but instead of stepping forward, he spoke a different kind of oath. Not a promise to the hunger, a promise to me. "I claim her," Kale said, voice roaring through the chamber. "Not as a tool, as my chosen mate." The words struck the air like lightning. The doorway shuddered. Marrow's presence surged into the room, her figure emerging from the shadows with fury like a wildfire. "You can't!" she screamed. "You promised to keep it sealed." Kale's eyes flashed toward her. "I promised to keep it sealed. I didn't promise it would stay empty." My mind reeled. Mate. The word was too intimate for the stone and blood around us, but I felt it, felt the bond snapping into place like a thread seeking its own weave. It didn't feel forced. It felt inevitable. But inevitability didn't erase the harm. I stepped closer to Kale, heart pounding, and I looked at Marrow like she was the disease that had been pretending to be medicine. "I was falsely accused," I said. "By my family. By you." Marrow's smile was feral now, no longer elegant. "Your family was never innocent. They were always willing to sacrifice you for power." I clenched my talisman. Then my eyes narrowed. "And yet you did it anyway." Marrow's expression flickered. I realized something. Marrow wasn't just stealing power. She was trying to erase a connection, something old that tied Kale's seal to my mark. She wanted to sever destiny. She wanted the hunger to feed without a guardian. I turned back to Kale. My voice softened despite the rage. "If I'm chosen, then choose me now. Not later. Not as leverage. As a person." Kale's face tightened, as if my words had cut through every protective layer he wore. "I should have freed you the moment I understood what you were," he said. Anger surged again. "Should've?" Kale's jaw clenched. "Yes." He stepped forward, lowering his forehead toward mine, not touching yet, asking with his body, "Forgive me for what I didn't do fast enough." My breath caught. He wasn't excusing himself. He was admitting failure. The doorway behind us hissed, and the hunger pressed at the edges of the sanctuary like a storm looking for a roof to tear open. Kale's hand finally touched my cheek, thumb brushing lightly over my scar's glow. The warmth soothed me, not erasing the fear but reshaping it into steadiness. "My king," Marrow spat. "You can't. She's infected with—" Kale cut her off with a snarl that didn't sound like cruelty. It sounded like authority rejecting corruption. "She's not infected," he said. "She's awakened, and the oath chose her." My mark flared hard. Lightning rippled through the doorway, silver lines wrapping around it like chains that decided where they would hold. Marrow screamed as the magic corrected itself. The doorway began to seal. Not through force alone, through bond, through acceptance. Kale held me steady, his other arm wrapping around my waist without squeezing, steady enough to reassure, careful enough to respect. "Stay with me," he said. I looked up at him, eyes burning. I always am." The last of the doorway's shadow collapsed into the basin's dark water, which went still again. Silence flooded the chamber. Marrow fell to her knees, panting, her eyes wide with hatred and disorientation. The elegant mask was gone. "You think this ends?" she rasped. "You think you can bind hunger with love?" Kale's gaze was cold again, controlled, not cruel. "No," he said. "I think love is what makes hunger choose restraint." He turned to me. His walls had not vanished, but they were no longer weapons. They were shields, lowering toward warmth. "My Lyra," he said, voice raw. "You survived exile. You survived lies. And you fought the door open." I swallowed hard. "And you fought to keep me alive." Kale nodded once. "Yes." I stared at him, searching for the old intimidation, the old fear that had surrounded his name. What I found instead was a man who had spent years holding back something dangerous, especially his own need. His mate bond pulsed between us like a heartbeat. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. It was destiny pressing down on two people who would have chosen each other anyway. Marrow was dragged away by guards Kale summoned, silently, efficiently. Her fate would be decided by law and consequence, not spectacle. I didn't need revenge, not when I finally had truth. After the chamber quieted, Kale escorted me back to the sanctuary. The sanctuary felt different now, less like a prison room and more like a home waiting to be claimed. He sat me on a carved stone bench and knelt in front of me. His posture was careful, deliberate. He didn't reach for my body as if it belonged to him. He reached for my trust. "I won't pretend the past can be undone," he said. but I can change what comes next." I inhaled slowly, still shaking from everything. "Tell me the truth," I said, "the part you kept sealed." Kale looked up at me, eyes dark gold, reflecting torchlight like molten metal. "I was given orders," he admitted. "Not by your family alone, by Marrow and the council that feared my seal. They told me you were treason, that your mark was a threat to the throne." My throat tightened. "And you believed them?" Kale's mouth tightened. "For a time," he said, "because I was drowning in responsibilities, and because I wanted the hunger sealed more than I wanted the truth revealed." He paused, and his gaze softened. "But then I heard your name in the stone, in the old mechanism. I heard your mark calling mine like it was an answer." I blinked. "You heard it?" He nodded. "Before you knew what you were." The knowledge struck me with a terrible sweetness. I had been alone in my exile, but Kale had been connected even then, connected yet still unable to reach me. I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. "Why didn't you free me?" I asked. Kale's answer came with a rough honesty that made me feel seen instead of controlled. "Because Marrow's lies were anchored in old rituals," he said. "If I freed you too early, the oath would have opened incorrectly. You'd have been consumed, not by the hunger alone, but by the version of fate they wrote for you." My nails dug into my skirt. So they had planned my death dressed as destiny. "And you waited," I whispered. Kale nodded. "I waited, and I hated every second." His confession cracked something in me. Anger didn't vanish, but it became something warmer, something closer to grief. "Then don't make me hate you," I said. My voice was unsteady. "Don't make me regret surviving." Kale lifted a hand and brushed his knuckles against my scar glow, like he was asking permission to enter the most vulnerable part of me. "I won't," he promised. "I'll earn you." Earning. It sounded like work, like patience, like walls coming down slowly instead of crashing all at once. I should have distrusted it, but I felt it, felt the way his mate bond steadied my pulse. Felt the way his attention didn't feel like a trap, it felt like devotion. I leaned forward and touched his forehead, just the lightest contact, mirroring his careful posture. Kale's breath hitched. "Then earn me," I said. Something in his expression broke into relief. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close without crushing. His chest rose against mine, as if he had finally stopped fighting his own need. His scent filled my lungs. Mine met his in the space between breaths. I didn't feel claimed like an object. I felt chosen like a truth. The sanctuary's wards hummed faintly, responding to the bond's formation. Not a cage, a sanctuary. I had been cast out for treason I didn't commit, but in Kale's world, beneath the earth, within carved stone and protective runes, my powers awakened not to condemn me, but to protect us. When I closed my eyes, I saw my family faces again. My brother's relief, my mother's silence, Marrow's smile. I didn't forgive them yet. But forgiveness wasn't the goal. Healing was. And I was learning healing could include rage, could include truth, could include choosing myself. Days passed in the sanctuary. Kale didn't lock me away. He trained me. He taught me how to feel the oath rather than fear it. He also taught me how to draw boundaries. When I demanded privacy to unravel the lies in my mind, he honored it. When I wanted the truth about my mark's origin, he didn't dodge. Slowly, his intimidating control softened into patience, and slowly, my exile hardened into strength. One night, I stood at the sanctuary entrance looking out at the moonlit courtyard above through a grated opening. The moonlight painted Kale's distant silhouette when he stepped outside. He didn't approach like a conqueror. He approached like a man who understood that proximity could be care. "Lyra," he said, voice quiet. I turned. "You said you'd earn me." Kale's mouth tilted. "This is how I do it." He held out his hand, not to command, but to offer. I took it. His fingers were warm and firm. His seal glowed faintly under the moon. My scar responded, pulsing like a heartbeat. He guided me a step closer to the open air, away from the sanctuary ward's hum. The night wind struck my skin, and I felt my power shift, subtle, not monstrous, like the difference between a storm and the sky after rain. I didn't need Kale's body to feel safe anymore. I needed his trust. He lowered his forehead toward mine again. "Tell me what you're afraid of," he whispered. I stared into his dark gold eyes. "That I'll become what they wanted," I admitted. Kale's thumb brushed my cheek, steadying my breathing. "Then we won't." He kissed my forehead, gentle, reverent. Not a claim, a promise. My throat tightened. Betrayal had tried to define me, but Kale's love and the bond we built through truth refused that definition. I belonged to myself first, and now to him by choice. When dawnlight finally bled into the kingdom above, Kale gathered me before the throne, not to put me on display, but to reclaim my name. My brother and mother stood there, pale and rigid. They looked smaller than they had in my memory, like people do when the walls of their lies collapse. Kale lifted his chin. "Lyra Varen is cleared," he declared. The council gasped. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again. My brother swallowed hard, eyes darting toward Marrow Sable's empty place, her fate sealed away. Kale's gaze stayed on me. "Because the truth surfaced when she chose to awaken it," he continued, "and because her oath recognizes my seal." I felt the bond pulse, a surge of certainty. Then Kale did the thing I hadn't dared hope for. He turned toward the crowd and spoke without hesitation. "She is my chosen mate," he said. The words didn't echo like a curse. They settled like a home. My family flinched as if the truth itself was a blade. I didn't flinch. I stepped forward and placed my hand over Kale's chest, where the scar mark of old kingship sat beneath his skin's armor. I looked at my brother. "You didn't protect me," I said, voice steady. "You protected what you thought you'd lose." My mother's eyes filled with something late and ugly, remorse that couldn't change the past. I didn't waste my energy begging for forgiveness. I granted myself permission to continue living. Then I turned back to Kale. His walls weren't fully gone. They weren't supposed to be. But his fear had been replaced by devotion. His authority had been reshaped by tenderness. His intimidation had become shelter. I didn't understand how love could survive betrayal, but I had lived it. We walked together into the daylight, him at my side, not ahead of me, not dragging, not pushing, guiding. And as the kingdom looked on, as rumors threatened to twist our story again, I felt my mark settle. No longer a burning wound, but a steady light. Transformed, chosen, not by fate alone, but by the strength I forged in the dark, and by a king whose walls came down slowly, one truthful moment at a time. Destiny fulfilled, because two people finally chose each other in a world that had tried to steal the choice.